Welcome to the Valley of Outlaws podcast, a podcast for those looking to take the road less trodden, and a podcast for those seeking more. Jack, you are Outlaw number 20. Welcome to the gang. It's a title you can have for the rest of your life, sir.
That's how I'm going to introduce myself now.
I have tried to convince people so far to put it on their LinkedIn profile. I am Outlaw number 20, but no one's done it yet. So maybe you'll be the first. Who knows?
Hey, I'll be Outlaw 20 on my LinkedIn. Yeah, all sorts on there. So yeah,
classic. All right, same question for everybody at the start. In your own words, who are you? What do you do? And why do you do what you do?
I am the founder of a podcast called Webflail, where I ask people intrusive questions about their web design and development career. And I am about to set up a studio with a friend of mine. So we're going to be doing web design and development for startups, which I'm very, very excited to do as well.
Very exciting. And why is this area of kind of work, and why did you start the podcast?
It's a bit of a tragic story. I basically wasn't getting any replies from anyone I looked up to ask them intrusive questions. And so I was basically a struggling freelancer, and I was struggling to get consistent clients. I was struggling I'd done all the courses about design and development and stuff. I'd done so many, online courses and read a lot of books, and I was like, why can't I do this now? Like, how do I get clients? And there's a lot of stuff that's not really talked about when you're a freelancer, like, how do you balance your life, and how do you do all the kind of the soft skills as well? Like, how do you sell a client? How do you convince someone that you're the right person to work with, and positioning, and all of this stuff that kind of is part of being a successful freelancer. Anyway, I reached out to loads of people who never replied to my emails, and one of them, I basically said, I'm starting a podcast. I'd be honored if you'd be my first guest. Would you come on? And this woman said yes. And I was like, oh my God, this is a cheat code for life, which we actually talked about before starting recording. Like, suddenly you can get access to people and basically ask them all the same questions that you would just want to ask them if you were picking their brains. But since you're recording it and, publicizing them, people are just really keen to actually come and talk to you. And then they actually start cold emailing you. Say, hey, can I come and tell you all my industry secrets? Well, yes, you can actually. So it's really exciting, and that's kind of turned from a hobby to something that I'm trying to grow, and now getting sponsorships and kind of moving in the right direction. Yeah.
So exciting. That's so cool. And the vision you had when you were younger, when you were at school, how different was that to the person you are now and the work you do now?
I think I was always quite weird at school. I'm just trying to imagine like how people would describe me at school. I think I wanted to do creative stuff, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And I remember we had a careers day at school where there was like an army general, a banker, and a lawyer turned up. I remember thinking, I don't think I'm any of you. And it was quite awkward, that careers day, because I was like, I don't really know what I'm meant to be doing, but I don't think it's any of them. And I did one of those, I can't remember what the tests are called, but basically like you do a massive tick box exercise at school. I remember we were all in this sports hall, like filling out this form, and then you get back the results. And I was meant to be a carpenter. They said, you know what, I think you should be a carpenter, mate. And
Bet your parents are happy.
well, yeah. It was like, okay. I didn't realise I was meant to be. But I definitely think that, frankly, that tick box form thing, I remember thinking this is dumb. But I also think that it definitely helped me, clarify that I'm not going to be a lawyer in the army, an accountant. Like, I definitely think I was like, okay, cool. Maybe I don't want a more kind of traditional path down that type of career path. But then I also didn't think I'd be necessarily doing podcasting at all. I've tried out loads of stuff, failed so much trying to
All right, we'll go through it today.
Oh, yeah, that's why I'm here, for the therapy. Free therapy. All these cameras on me.
Well, what did you study at university?
I did Spanish and Portuguese.
Yes, okay, makes sense now.
Yeah, so I basically knew that I wanted to live and work abroad, and I wanted to have the opportunity to live and work abroad. So I was thinking, okay, let's study languages, and then at least I'll be able to kind of make my way abroad. And then I remember in final year we were doing a module all about tools to help you with language learning, and I remember there was this little device that you could basically hold it up to anyone in any language and it translated back what they said. And I remember thinking, fuck, languages is not going to be the thing that... And I didn't really want to be a language teacher or a translator, or kind of maybe the more traditional path that you might take if you had studied languages. Although people that study languages do all sorts of different things. But I guess I was just kind of like, okay, what can I do that's online that gives me the flexibility to live and work where I want? And that's when I started doing brand identity design and thinking about marketing and all this stuff.
What was the trigger for that then?
I think this is a pretty classic answer, but I read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And I remember being in final year at uni and reading this book, and the premise of the book, if anyone's listening and doesn't know what it's about, but it's essentially that Tim Ferriss says you don't necessarily need to choose a traditional career path to have a really great lifestyle. And I'll tell you now, working 4 hours a week, I didn't manage that. But the concept is more, I think it's more of like a kind of catchy title more than the premise is more that to have the lifestyle that you might want to have, you don't necessarily need to be earning a lot of money in order to do that.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking, wow, okay, I don't want a grad scheme. All of my mates are applying for grad schemes and stuff, and I just remember thinking, I don't see myself doing that. So I then moved to Portugal after uni, and I worked on a vineyard, which is the obvious thing to do. And during that time, I was basically trying to do a lot of design courses online, and I was like they did weddings at this vineyard, and I remember I was like serving food at the wedding and stuff, and I was like, hey, what do you do and stuff, and trying to get work from serving canapes at weddings. It's pretty extreme selling.
That's genius.
But I actually...
There's no competition in that field.
Well, this is the thing. How many graphic designers or aspiring graphic designers were serving canapes at that? I doubt that many. But yeah, I actually got... One of my first jobs was a wedding photographer's branding.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So I met this guy who's obviously working at the vineyard/wedding venue. And I did his brand identity, and then one of the family at this vineyard, basically wanted to set up a business, and they wanted to, and I was just trying to get a portfolio together. Yeah. And it was quite a weird time though, because I think I quickly learned that without having security, you can live anywhere in the world, but I was living so cheap. Yeah. And it was actually quite grim because, you might live somewhere beautiful, like Porto in Portugal, which is where I ended up. And, I was renting, a flat with like 8 guys, and it was just like, we're living in bunk beds, and, it was just grim. It was like, Brazilians and Croats, and it was a really kind of fun, but very big realization of like, okay, I know that I don't want to necessarily live like this for that much longer, and I need to prioritize kind of security in order to achieve that lifestyle eventually, if that makes sense.
Sure. And what were your passions when you were younger, and what part of those passions did you connect with design? Because I imagine there's got to be some sort of sequential kind of like flow between it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think I always was quite interested in why people bought stuff. What triggered people to behave in certain ways, and I think design was something that I just became interested in by virtue of trying to do entrepreneurial things, to be honest. Like I tried to set up a t-shirt brand at school, which is like the classic thing that everyone does, I know.
I'm pretty sure I tried.
Yeah, no, we've all been there. We've all thought we're going to take over the world and print shitty t-shirts and tie-dye them in the garden or whatever. But I remember like trying to make a website from that process and being, obviously more interested in design and kind of working out like, why does this color palette work and why does you kind of, I think by virtue of trying to understand how to do entrepreneurial stuff, I became interested in design. And I think from brand identities to wireframing, to UI UX design, and then development stuff. But I've definitely come to a point where I'm like, okay, you're not going to be good at everything, and I'm most definitely not. I think there's this weird point that you come to where you try out loads of stuff throughout your 20s. It's like a workshop phase in my head. And then you're like, okay, I've done the trying out phase. Now what do I want to be really good at now that I've tried all these different things? And by that point, you've hopefully got quite a good base of skills. And then you can, you've got the perspective to be like, you know what, out of all the things I've tried, I think this is where I really want to focus on. And that's not to say that you can't explore other stuff. I think it's really important to always be curious and always try out things. But I think for me, it's just to realize like, what do you want to be known for, like professionally?
Yeah, no, I get that. It's interesting actually, because it was a similar route for me into kind of like branding and marketing, and the small stints I've done of it was actually from creating my own wallpaper to building a website to sell it, to then figure out how do you convince people that you're actually a trustworthy source. And like every part of that is thinking about business as a whole. But like, even like your website, like, how do I want someone to go through my website? You have to break down the thinking in such a way. And from that, I was able to then go and work with other people and do websites with them and help with their branding, just because I've been through the process and had a clear idea of what I liked. Yeah. And it's crazy how much small little things like where you're trying to do your own stuff, actually the trying and learning that process is actually the service you can sell later on rather than the end product.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's like, if you can prove that you can do it within your, tiny circle, then you become the go-to guy for that. And then it kind of widens as you explore. And that certainly happened for me. I was like the only person in my friendship group that had made a website, and it was on it was a Wix website. Like I wasn't like, whoa.
Let's not dig Wix. Okay, I still use them regularly.
Wix is still good. All I'm saying though is that it's funny how I think people kind of see you as the person that can do X, and then it's like you can either pursue that and really double down on it, or be like, I can do that, but then you might find about SEO, and you're like, oh, actually, copywriting is really interesting. I realized that photography makes a huge difference on the website. I want to always pursue that. So
no, it's really interesting. Were you raised by like your parents to think outside the box? Like, did they say to you, Jack, you need to have a career, you need to have some security? Like, did your parents kind of allow you to kind of just explore where you wanted to go? Were there any kind of like ways which they narrowed you down paths, or did they just let you be and experience what you wanted to experience?
Oh yeah, this is a real therapy session. Yes, they were really encouraging of exploration, I think, and that's a huge part of how you can kind of have the confidence to try stuff at an early age. If people are encouraging you to try out whatever creative thing like painting, or if you're interested in filmmaking or anything like that. And I remember we tried to make a go-kart in the basement of our house, like with my dad, and we tried to like actually build stuff that we designed and things. But I definitely think it gets to a point where your parents are like, okay, great, you're doing all this play and exploring, and then suddenly it's kind of like, okay, how are you going to spend your life? What do you want to be professionally? And that's where the kind of playful stage, I think, does naturally get narrower, partly because GCSEs force you to chop things, and then A-levels chop even more, and And then it's like, what are you going to uni for? And I think it does naturally get narrower and narrower just because of how the education system is set up.
Yeah.
I also think, yes, I think my parents have been pretty worried about how the life of a freelancer, and maybe this relates to you, you know, by virtue of trying stuff out, you don't necessarily have a lot of consistency.
Yeah.
And that means, you know, that impacts your routine. Like I've moved a lot of countries and that's been great, but, you know, it really impacts your financial security. It really impacts, you know, friendships and relationships. And there's a lot, as you change a lot personally, it does naturally affect a lot of different areas of your life. And I do think that they are coming from a loving place and worried, but they are worried and they're like trying to help. But I think I'm quite stubborn, and I think the more I'm told, oh no, you shouldn't really be doing that, Jack, it's like, well, let's see about that. And that doesn't always go well, if I'm frank. Like a lot of the time my parents have been right. So yes, I think they have been really supportive of creative stuff, but also are worried and do recognize the importance of security. I guess like your parents, though, like if they're anything like mine, they're, you know, retiring, they're thinking a lot about very practical, you know, like, okay, what's our pension? Like if you don't have a traditional job, where's your pension? Like they are kind of thinking as me
as parents should do.
Yeah, as me in 40 years.
Yeah.
Like they're at that stage, so they're like,
Yeah.
okay, if I was you, I'd do, and I'm like, well, you're not me, are you? And then you know you feel bad because you know you owe them a lot, and it's hard. But
I always think that in this position, it's those who are willing to risk the most who, in some ways, also have the opportunity to gain the most as well. Like if you were to play it a little bit safer, okay, and say sacrifice a little bit on what you were doing. Okay, you're going to take 3 days a week of a set job, which you don't love. Like that burning ambition and passion you've got for everything else, and the kind of dreams you've got kind of get petered down a little bit as well.
yeah, it's hard though, because I think, I mean, to be honest, I've come to a point where I thought I could do anything I wanted, and you know, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. And there are like real life objective things that mean that you do need to kind of not play it safe so much as just be realistic. My therapist described my energy as both chaotic and spontaneous at the same time. And she was like, the spontaneousness is great, and it means that you're a risk taker, and that's great, that you can kind of, you're not so worried about the consequences of stuff, you'll just go with it. But then also that does have a kind of chaotic factor to it, and it's just knowing when to kind of think, okay, if we are going to take this risk, how does that impact other areas of our life and stuff? And I think I've become more and more aware of, you know, how I do need a base level of security in order to do the creative things as well, because the creative stuff does cost. And
with age, there comes seriousness.
yeah, I mean, I sound like I'm 50. I'm not. I think I am still really keen to do my own thing. And like I say, with this podcast and stuff, that, you know, now we're trying to push for sponsorships and stuff, and it's not as much of like a hobby, and I'm trying to create it, you know, turn it into a business. And there are like realistic, you know, a business kind of has to make money. So you do need to think, okay, do I really want to partner with this person who's got a product that I'm not that bothered about, but they are offering money? And then it's kind of like an interesting dynamic where you're trying to manage the creative thing that you love to do, but also realize that kind of has to come from somewhere. So yeah, I sound like 105, but I think maybe you're asking me this question in a very like, pertinent time when I'm thinking a lot about it and just trying to work out how the creative stuff is going to continue to happen, and that eventually with a longer time horizon thinking, like it will become something that can financially sustain itself. But yeah, I think I have had a bit of a realization, like, okay, I do need to be a little bit more Maybe more like the accountant. I never chose to be at that career fair. So yeah.
I disagree. What I'd love to kind of go on is this kind of journey to just before the podcast started. What were kind of like the hurdles you had and the failures you had, which pushed you in these different directions? Because I remember we used to have calls, maybe like every 4 months or something. I'm like, hey, Jack, how's it going? You're like, I'm doing websites for yoga teachers.
Yeah,
this is my thing.
God, yeah. Yeah.
So give us a little idea of actually, the process of becoming this kind of website designer and this branding person, and how it kind of went from one to another, and then why podcasting essentially was the place to sit on.
Yeah. It's so interesting how you have seen me, like how, you saying that stuff to me is really funny. Because I was trying to do yoga websites, or yoga instructor websites, which as anyone that's listening to this probably realizes failed massively.
Well, you had one client, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, I had a little bit of work. I mean, it wasn't the problem, from a lead generation's perspective, it was actually really good because no one else chose that niche, right? For obvious reasons. The problem was actually, having a sustainable lifestyle, doing, pretty cheap websites for a lot of, and also yoga instructors don't need custom websites. That doesn't really make sense either.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a fail.
No, but do you know what it is though? It was a lesson.
Yes. So I think when I say a fail, not that I regret it as much as it didn't work out as I'd hoped, and I definitely think I learned a lot from it. But so we were having calls a lot during that period of, I guess the kind of messy middle of like trying to work through. I think that the problem that I had was I wanted to live abroad. I wanted to do creative stuff, and I was like trying to figure out how to do that. And one big concept that actually comes up a lot in my podcast, which I'm just trying to plug, is
please feel free to plug it all you need to.
No, I sound like such a dickhead. One big concept is about niching, and essentially you can niche by industry, by tool stack, by particular area of the tool that you use that for, or whatever. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to niche by industry. So I went from I wanted to be a green website designer.
Yes, that was what it was for.
Yeah, so I was trying to do sustainable companies. And the problem with that was that there was I got a lot of random inbound requests of all sorts of different things, but a lot of kind of greenwashing more than green companies approaching. So I was like, I don't really know if I want to be part of that because I feel like a bit of a fraud. And then, then I was doing this yoga instructor niche, so I hard turned into that because my ex-girlfriend was a yoga instructor, and I basically had started down that path and was doing a bit of yoga at the time.
Do you know what's the best part is? I remember you told me about it, and I was like, that's a great thing to do. And I gave you the reference to me going, I've started doing wallpapers and I'm only selling it to golf clubs in the UK. And you're like, that is genius.
Yeah, I remember us being like in this echo chamber of just like, this is not a good idea. But I think, maybe we both wanted our ideas to succeed.
I think we recognise the point though of, as you said, of actually having a niche is easier to grow in quicker, and then you expand it out of the niche.
Yeah, and I still think that niching is really important to consider if you're trying to do freelancing. It's just making sure that, one, you really love the area that you're trying to niche in. Two, you've kind of got good positioning in that niche as well. Like if you're just like, if it's because it's not, niches can be like uber large. Like Webflow, for example, the software that I use is like, there's a lot of people that say I'm a Webflower, and that can mean a lot of different things because there's a lot of different websites out there. So it's kind of like, but anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not that niching is bad. I think it was just that I was trying to work through all of this trying to work out how to get creative work, how to fulfill that, and how to work with people I actually wanted to work with. There was a lot of things to work out. I set up a YouTube channel at the time called the Creative Book Club, which was an effort to get clients, which, as you may have guessed from that snigger, it didn't work out either.
What was the premise?
It was so dumb, to be honest, man. I basically set up this YouTube channel, which was me, and this was in Portugal in that shitty flat, so they're still online. But yeah, they basically, I talked about graphic design books and went through different design.
That's more niche.
Yeah, it's super weird. Design, marketing, positioning books and stuff, which I was really into at the time. And the idea was that I basically showed, I don't really know what I thought. I guess I showed that I'd done the research or or like, I don't know, had opinions about this type of stuff, which I was just parroting from the author that I literally read the book of. So it wasn't original thought. But yeah, no, I obviously didn't get any work from that. And I put a ton of effort in because, I was trying to do a video a week, which meant reading a book a week, or trying to, skim a book each week to try and actually write a script and record this video and then edit a video. It was the dumbest thing. And I was trying to get, web design or brand work, and it was very dumb.
What was stopping you for going, fuck it, I'll go and get a 9 to 5?
I think, to be honest, I did eventually. I basically, I was trying so hard to get branding work, and I didn't know enough about the kind of all the stuff that's not necessarily as talked about. I mean, if you want to learn a software, you can do that. If you want to learn principles of design, you can do that. Like that information is readily available. What's not necessarily readily available is the soft skills that come from just living, like relationship building and also just knowing how to sell, and not necessarily like hard selling. It's just having the confidence to charge what you think you're worth, and learning kind of how you want to operate. And I think it's quite hard to do that in a silo. Like if I'm freelancing out the bat without having ever worked at an agency or anything, without having any systems and process, and just kind of shooting from the hip type thing. I think it is quite difficult to do that. But then I did get more of a 9 to 5 job, and I didn't last at all because I think, and I've never had a job more than a year. So, it's been quite had a lot of jobs on my CV.
Why didn't you last?
I think one thing is that when you are a freelancer, you realize that it's really fun to manage. Well, I find it, and not that everyone's like this at all, but personally, I find it really liberating to focus on the thing that you have to do without having meetings about meetings. And obviously, you have a client, so you have meetings with freelance work, but it's not the same as, there's a boss and there's colleagues, and, there's the politics of trying to get a raise and all of that stuff. You can kind of, if you are good at it, and I really need to caveat that, because I think a lot of the time people think freelancing, you can work from wherever you want, charge whatever you like, work with whatever clients you want. Like, if you're good at what you do, then I think all of that stuff is very attainable. But I really struggled in Portugal, like I said, and I've done and then kind of dotted around full-time jobs, got sick of them, fell out with the manager or boss or whoever I was working with, and also things just move quite slowly. In the bigger the organization, the harder it is to get stuff done. And I think I'm more of like I want to kind of see things through. Like if we've got an idea, okay, let's action it, or let's do it tomorrow or whenever. Like let's set a date and make sure it happens. And I just found that really hard to do in companies. Yeah. And I think bosses and managers just ultimately got really pissed off with me as a result. So I was like, are we doing this? And
I'm waiting here.
Yeah, I just don't think I'm a very good employee. To be
what a great thing to find out, though.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I can tell you right now, there's a lot of employees who haven't realised that they're rubbish.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the other thing that I found interesting at these big companies is that actually they also didn't know as much as I thought they would know when I started working there. And I realized that there was a lot of people that weren't actually doing that much. Like
There's usually one person who knows everything, and
yeah.
they reference on that one person.
And this is the interesting thing that I found. There's a few key players that are basically juggling the rest of the jobs
Yeah.
that other people aren't doing as well as maybe
Yeah.
they should, or just not really caring. I think that's the other thing that I found really interesting at working in full-time jobs is that a lot of the time people are, going at 4 p.m. for a massive shit and or whatever. Like they're just kind of like trying to, just they're in the job because they need the money from the job. And I think that's where I struggle because I'm quite, sometimes, I don't know, I think I really want to, I'm not as motivated by money as I think I am, like the purpose of what I'm doing. And if I don't really see the purpose and if other people aren't really like trying to push as much as me, I think I find it quite frustrating.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a nice generalized statement out. I feel that as a proportion of people in businesses who are more there for self-serving interests. And so, like, when as freelancers or people who actually have a passion to do something, we're actually there for the client, the thing we're going to do, more than how we're going to be paid to do it and how many hours we have to do. Like, we'd be willing to work 14-hour days as someone who's opposed to counting the clock for 8 hours.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, I think there are definitely like people who love their jobs and also love the team element of being in a job.
Yeah.
And like I completely appreciate. I've really enjoyed going to co-working spaces for that reason to have that kind of collaborative feel, even though I'm working on an independent project a lot of the time. But so yeah, I'm not. I sound like such a dickhead because obviously a lot of people do work in full-time jobs and companies and love it and do a fantastic job. I guess I just found that I didn't fit with me, and I've never really. I mean, one of the worst ones was when I was working as a website manager for a bank, like a challenger bank. It wasn't like a big bank at all. Anyway, it was a great job. And like cool pay and cool and really fascinating people, in a really interesting space. But trying to do, there was just a lot of like, I couldn't really realize my ideas in the way that I wanted to. And it's hard to, I just find it a bit hard to like just sit there and like, be in a meeting where we're discussing like a bazillion different options. And it's like, well, we've all like, I think we should just try something, test it.
Yeah.
And then kind of, we can iterate, but I don't know. It just felt
get something out there rather than the perfect thing.
Yeah.
I get you.
But I don't know. I'm still, to be honest, you're asking me these questions and I'm still trying to work out a lot of this stuff. Like, how much do I want to risk? Now I'm getting a little bit, not a little, like I'm not like old, but
28.
I mean,
mate, I'm 30 this year and I'm still gonna throw it all away probably.
No, I mean, I think this is the important thing. Like, as long as you're intentional about whatever you're doing and you accept the consequences of whatever decision you've made, I think taking ownership of that is the important thing. Not necessarily whatever decision you make. It's more, I think, the ownership of that decision. And making sure that you're aware of, okay, what is the time horizon that we talked about earlier, and kind of making sure that you give a good run of it, but also accepting like if something doesn't work, okay, it's not like you need to hustle and grind to make this work and like, lose your mental health and all that other stuff that I think sometimes I'm looking at these guys on like YouTube and stuff, I'm like, you are not okay. You're not selling this course because you're doing well, mate. We all know it's. Anyway, sorry.
That's okay. Let's get on to Webflow. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I want to know. Give me the basic rundown for anyone who doesn't know what it is. What are you trying to achieve with it?
So, well, that's kind of changed as I've gone along the process. Webflail is Webflow and failure, and I've basically smashed those words together.
Love it.
It's not the most inventive name, but it's meant to be a combination of those two things because I ask people that specifically use this tool called Webflow, which is it's basically a low code website builder, and a lot of designers use it because it's quite a visual platform, but you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. And yeah, there's a lot more to be said about it. But anyway, I wanted to specifically ask people who use this platform about their failures, because there's a lot of podcasts where, when I actually found this with the Creative Book Club, like the word creativity, I mean, you can be a creative, bricklayer, or like you can be creative anything, right?
Yeah.
You can be an economist or whatever. There's creativity. Everyone has creative interests. So, and as a result, people that came, we actually did like meetups and stuff, and it was so broad, the books we read and stuff, that it didn't really work out. So anyway, I wanted to focus in on that, and Webflail, I basically ask them about their 3 biggest failures as Webflowers. And the people that I interview are either freelancers or agency owners, and yeah, they tell me their deepest, darkest secrets, and then that's turned from something which really focuses on basically having imposter syndrome and all the things that come with trying to do entrepreneurship in the like digital world that people don't really talk about. Like how do you balance life? Like when you have a kid, how do your priorities change? Like there's a lot of stuff that I think you can't just learn from doing a course. You kind of live it out, and I really wanted to talk about that, because in 140 characters on Twitter, most people are just talking about how much money they're making, which is important to celebrate successes, but I just think it's important to contextualize those successes after a hell of a lot of ups and downs in the last 20 years or whatever they're doing.
Exactly. It's a recognition of the journey, isn't it?
Yeah, and everyone who's successful, what I've found is that everyone who's successful has, even if they seem like an overnight success, they have been messing up, taking wrong turns, trying stuff, failing, iterating for years before they achieve that success. I mean, the most successful freelancers that I have on the show have all worked at an agency for years, and have got so much experience working with other professionals around them, and then they become a freelancer, and everyone's like, wow, they're doing so well and stuff. It's like, let's contextualize that a bit. They didn't realize what the hell they were doing as a freelancer for years. Then maybe they got an agency job, then I don't know, they met someone who was a mentor to them for years. There's all sorts of things that influence it. So that's kind of Webflail in a nutshell.
And what were the kind of the biggest challenges, I guess, you faced early on in terms of getting people to listen, getting people to interact?
Yeah. Is this you?
I'm learning.
Yeah.
This next segment is solely for me.
Yeah.
This is solely.
Turn off the cameras.
So we can have. No one else needs to listen to this. This is solely for my purpose, so I can have more than 12 listeners on Spotify.
Unless you're interested in podcasting. Biggest challenges. Well, I think the hardest thing about doing a podcast is actually doing it consistently over a long time period. Like the barrier to entry to set up a podcast is very low, but it's very hard to do a good podcast. Like it's very easy to drive a car, but it's very, very hard to drive a Formula One car well around a track type thing, right? So I think, getting the podcast started and stuff was quite scary as well, because, you're like, I'm going to record my stupid voice and, like ask someone questions who's way better than me, basically. But I think then it's just a question of doing it long enough so that you actually get good. And I think, to come back to I know you were joking about like 12 listeners or whatever on Spotify, but I think essentially before you do something a lot, you're going to be not nearly good enough. Like you're not going to be very good at it. And there gets to a point where, when you are good enough, people will listen and recognize it. And I think there's a point that you get to where there's this kind of critical mass of experience and guests you have on, and you just know what you're doing enough for people to think this is what I want to listen to and engage with, because this person, is clearly good enough at what they do that I want to take an interest type thing.
Yeah.
But before that, I think there's kind of like a really nice period where no one cares.
Yeah.
And you can just be like, okay, I'm getting better, getting the reps in, as it were, and just really getting good at the thing, so that when people do realize, what this is about and what we're doing, then they'll really love it.
Yeah, and you're up to speed.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like Lewis Howe and who else? There's a lot of other podcasters that I've heard this similar idea that essentially, you don't. I think there's this perception that when you make stuff, people will come. And I think that's fundamentally not true. I think you need to make stuff, learn from no one coming and why they're not coming, and why the thing you haven't made maybe isn't at the level that they want, or you haven't found your right audience yet. But eventually you'll get to a stage where I think there is kind of a critical mass, and there's this like waterfall effect of like people finding all your content, and then you've got your kind of core listener group that tell their friends, and then it's like there's this kind of momentum it's really, really hard to stop a charging elephant. But when the elephant's just static, it's not, you haven't got the momentum and the ball rolling yet to then kind of have that charging elephant, as it were.
How long did it take for you to feel really comfortable in leading a podcast and actually having conversations with people you looked up to?
I don't know if I'm there yet, mate, to be honest. I think I've definitely got better and better at hosting, but I do think that, every guest you have on is like, it's a new thing. Yeah. Like it's a, totally different personality. I probably haven't ever met the person before, so you got to make the guest comfortable. They might have had a bad day before coming on the podcast. There's time zones, so sometimes it might be like 11 p.m. for an Australian guest. Or normally I'm the one that's, staying up late for the show. And so, yeah, I definitely think that you're never really, I feel like an imposter every time I hit record. Like I'm in my bedroom recording and I'm just there like,
okay,
I'm not where I want to be. But I definitely think that listening to podcasts, great podcasters in my opinion, and trying to just notice the little things that they do, the little moments where they might push back on a guest and just like tease out something that they might have said that's interesting rather than just move on, or share their own experience so that the guest opens up even more. We talked about this in the cafe earlier, like just having moments where you express your own vulnerability so that they feel safe to share whatever they're feeling vulnerable about. But that's the interesting stuff that, when people share what they're really about, that's when the best podcasts come out, I think. And that's where you get, more engagement on social media for the clips, and, people will share it. And that's kind of where this learning through just doing it a lot, I think, comes in.
It's the 10,000 hours principle, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's such boring advice.
Yeah.
But I find the most boring advice is the best advice pretty much always for me. Like we talked about the security at the start of the podcast. Well, okay, you need whatever the thing is that's giving you money so that you can put that into the creative stuff, or so that it gives you the brain space to do the creative stuff without worrying about money. And, it's boring advice, but it's true. It's really true. Like, if you're worrying about money, it's really hard to do good creative work, in my opinion. And then, vice versa with the podcast stuff. Like, there's all sorts of people promising, if you do this, you're going to get a spike in listeners or whatever. I've tried a lot of different stuff. It hasn't worked for me. Or something that's quite random that does work really well. Something that does work really well, which is proper random, is I send out Christmas cards to all my guests every year.
Do you? Handwritten?
Yeah. What was that?
Handwritten or?
Yeah, handwritten.
They're not moonpigged.
No, I don't like Moonpig.
Okay, good.
No offense, Moonpig.
No offense. We don't want to slam a big brand.
No offense to anyone that sends me Moonpigs is more what I meant. If you send me a Moonpig card, fuck you. No, but I think there's something really special about getting a handwritten card, and I love receiving handwritten cards. And I think most of the time when I get posts now, it's bills, and no one likes receiving a bill.
Yeah.
But if you get a handwritten card through the post, it's like a really special kind of thing. But what I've found is that I'll write a Christmas card to all my guests, so anyone that's come on the podcast, and it cost me a lot of money because I've had guests, all over, which is really exciting. But what's really fun about it is that people will share it on social, and people might just DM me and be like, hey, thanks for the card, it's just arrived. And it might be in January or February. It's normally a little bit later than I planned, but it's I think
Christmas Eve.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, normally in January I'm still writing them. But it's just a really like special little thing that is weirdly just quite a unique thing, which means that guests I'll start a conversation with someone that might have come on the podcast a year ago, and they might recommend me someone to come on the podcast, or that they might share the Christmas card or whatever. And I think that's quite a strange, like, random thing which you're not going to read in a blog about how to grow your podcast or listen to the course or whatever. But actually your previous guests, I think, are a huge asset for like promotion of your podcast. And I think it's kind of like an interesting way of getting people, like getting past guests re-engaged with your podcast, and also like maybe sharing what you do more and stuff like that. So
just when's your birthday, and what day do you like to receive your Christmas card? Do you know what it is? It's authenticity.
Yeah.
And it was one of my questions was, how important is authenticity to you?
Yeah. I feel like authenticity is one of those funny words which I never really know what it means. I guess. Okay, well, why don't you define it to us, what you think it is? Authenticity, I guess, like when people are fully embodying themselves to a certain extent, like when they let their guard down and you like truly see their full weirdness or their fullness. When someone says, what they're really about, and that maybe their insecurities, but it's this whole idea of authenticity online, I think, is really interesting because, we might have. I'd like to think we're having exactly the same type of conversation that we would have, anywhere else.
I feel we've carried on from the cafe.
But it is quite weird that, you're trying to be authentic with, lights and camera, and it's being recorded, and you are aware of that even subconsciously. Like, I'm not actively thinking, fuck, I've got to say the right thing. But I am like, okay, this is going to be online.
This is going down in history.
And how did, well, yeah, maybe. But I hope not. But it is an interesting scenario where it's like, how are how do you represent yourself online? And what I've found is that the more me I am, the more weird I am, and the more willing to actually be fully weird me online, the better it is. And actually, the happier I am. And I've found that, for example, I post on Twitter and LinkedIn for Webflail stuff, and the more I, like do my silly dad banter, which isn't funny at all, but gets the punters. No, but as in, like, when people know me and then they read me, I want that to be the same experience. Or when people see me on social media or in real life, I'd like to think I'm the same person. Yeah. And I think we do get. I certainly was like, on LinkedIn, I must, I delighted to announce I've just got a, like, who gives a flying fuck? But you do get into this kind of corporate 100%. Mode of writing or
preconceived ideas of how you think you should act.
Yeah, but I think that's what's really liberating about Webflow, was that it never was really, it was meant to be a selfish thing for me to just ask intrusive questions so that I could get better as a freelancer. And then that's how it started. And I feel like that same energy is kind of carrying on. Like, I didn't really think anyone would listen, and I do think it's really important for me to be just 110% weird me. In order, and I think, to be honest, I think that's partly why anyone other than my mum does listen, is because they if they've met me, they know what I'm like, and if they listen to the podcast, hopefully they feel that I'm just a weird Jack that's asking hopefully the same kind of questions that they would want to ask if they were in that room with the guests.
Yeah,
so.
no, 100%. It was interesting while you were speaking. It was reminding me of times at university and school where I was analysing friendship groups and which circles what I felt most comfortable in, and without insulting both sides, I always went to the so-called weirdos because they were happy to be themselves. They were authentic. They weren't affected by these other groups where you'd be in a group and well, what does everyone else think about this? Or I got the dress in this jacket, so everybody else has got this new jacket. Like this smoker's jacket is the thing. I need to have one of those so I can try. These guys will just do what the hell they wanted to do. There was no observation, no awareness of this whole trying to be someone else just to level yourself up. And it happened to me through school. It happened at university a lot, and it was like, these kind of like groups and individuals, I salute them because they are at school called the weirdos, but what they really are is just people being themselves.
Yeah.
And it's so invaluable, like to have people around you who are willing to tell you the truth, but also speak their own truth and actually not be affected by peer pressure or other things.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though, where people are so keen to be part of a tribe, as it were. Like we're so keen to fit in, but also really keen to be original thinkers. Like it's quite funny. Like when I was at school, we had this like dress what you want, dress as whatever you want day or whatever. And I had this, I don't know if you remember it, but there was this Fanta top. It was like a blue top with a Fanta logo on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know who did it. Maybe Top Man or H&M or whatever. But I remember thinking, I've just got this top, I'm going to kill it. Walk out, everyone's wearing the same fucking top. And I remember just thinking, like, God, I'm such a sheep. Yeah. And we're all trying so hard to fit in, but trying to get the next best thing, but like, the next trend, or like listen to this music early or whatever. But actually, we're all... we're all pretty tragically the same, unless we are genuinely comfortable with being called out by the people that maybe aren't necessarily as comfortable by just following whatever they're fully into or listening to whatever music they want, or if they like Katy Perry, just fucking own it.
I mean, it's amazing looking back on kind of like your education and growing up from like, let's say 15 to 25 and just analysing it. I think it's really interesting because I was exactly the same. Like there was moments where I was like, it's safer to fit in rather than stand out. But they got to a point where I was just like, I don't actually mind anymore standing out for the reasons people think are wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think at school I'd really necessarily like got comfortable enough in my skin to be fully me. I think, to be honest, from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think the smartest thing you can possibly do is lean into whatever people think is weird about you. People comment on how I use these weird metaphors a lot in the podcast. So I'll be like, so it's kind of, I've done a couple today already, I think, like the elephant pushing up a hill. I was like, is that really relevant? But I think there's things like that, people comment on them being funny, or like, oh, it's interesting how you see whatever the guest says or whatever. Yeah. And it's definitely the guest's show. I'm not trying to obviously like, be like the funny guy or whatever, because that is not at all the vibe of the podcast. But I do think that, as a host and just as a person, just like, what people, what some people might really dislike is what some people really love about you. And I think it's far better to be a Marmite character
100%,
and really lean into like, okay, these people don't like the worst way you can possibly be described in my head is just nice, like as an adjective, like just full stop. Yeah. It's like, that could be what? Like, they're not going to kill me, but I might be able to chat with them for 10 minutes without dying. And then, like a really, really good, nice, like funny, or like there's so many other adjectives to use, but the word nice, I just think is so dead. It just means like meh. And I think if you can be like, even if someone's like, that Jack guy was a bit weird, I'd way prefer that than, Jack was nice. Like if everyone in a room just says, Jack was nice.
Nice is forgettable.
I'd way prefer some people to be like, Ooh, his sense of humor was a bit. I mean, not that I'm saying anything like awful,
Well, let's
but
let the
as in
listeners
like,
decide today, shall we? We can get some.
yeah,
I'll put
it's not for me to
I'll put a
decide.
question. I'll put a question and answer out on the podcast. Is Jack
Yeah.
nice or is he weird?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that would be a straight 50-50 maybe. I don't know. I just think, yeah, it's if you play it safe. What I've found so far in this kind of wiggly journey of trying to do entrepreneurial stuff and failing a lot most of the pretty much all the time, is the stuff that's gone well is the stuff that people are like, what's that? Like, that's a bit random. Or what he said is a bit controversial. And I'm not trying to be one of those clickbaity people that's saying controversial things without actually having something to back up whatever the thing is that I'm saying. Because I think there are a lot of people that just say controversial stuff just to get attention, and I don't think that's particularly healthy. But I do think it's good to take a side. Like if you are someone that, you know, has a quirky sense of humor, don't tone that down just because there are people that might say, you're weird online.
No, I agree. No, I agree.
That's my take.
Well, we're going to get into the therapy part of the session, which
We're going to get into
yeah,
the therapy?
you might
This
have
is only
thought-
just starting?
We're closing down into the other stuff, but the first question is quite similar to this. Is like, how important is it for you to surround yourself with like-minded people?
Oh, it's essential. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole reason why I set up this podcast, and actually, I've found this weird thing happening where I'm actually better friends with people on Twitter than in real life, which is pretty tragic, maybe. But I think it's because I have basically hung out with these guys and girls in real life at like Webflow meetups, and like, you know, we're all trying to do this weird little kind of, it's like a subculture of like, you know, talking about you know, design stuff or sharing client work and commenting on it and trying to help each other all kind of navigate this journey of freelancing and collaborate on work and whatever it is, right? So yeah, I mean, if I didn't follow all these people and interact with them and share and try and navigate stuff together, I think life would be far less rich, and I wouldn't realize the glass ceilings that maybe I had that were imaginary, right? Like there's a lot of stuff about, oh, you know, you can't work with that. The agencies work with those people. You can't do that as a freelancer. Well, actually, you know, you realize very quickly that the world is way less kind of linear than you might think, and there's all sorts of things that can happen. And certainly with pricing for projects and stuff like that as well, you know, there's all sorts of stuff where we attach our self-worth to how much we would charge for our work. And, you know, when a client gives, you know, bad feedback on or negative feedback on your work, you like really feel that, and kind of separating those two things. And yeah, they're support network. They're everything. Yeah. I can't explain it enough. It's essential.
I love that.
That's my take. It's not a hot take. It's probably pretty obvious, but
biggest self-limiting belief, which you had to overcome.
Oh, biggest one. God, there's so many. I think the biggest thing that I think maybe the biggest one is learning the power of no. So a lot of the time as a freelancer, and maybe you internalize this from childhood where you want to impress your parents and then your teachers, and you're trying to do things for other people for that validation. And so when someone asks you to do something, you're kind of, well, I find I'm like, yes, I can do that. You know, changes on a project, yeah, I can do that. But you don't necessarily attach that to, okay, so what I'm going to do is charge you for that, or, you know, I was going to say worse, but this is something that I've been struggling with, is saying no and being like, I'm saying no, but that's not because I want to, like, even if it disappoints you, I'm still going to say no because I need to protect my own boundaries and learning that boundary setting thing. So I think the biggest limiting belief I had is that I had to say yes, or I said yes more than I should have done. And that saying no to someone isn't saying I hate you. It's actually just protecting your own time and having boundaries is crucial.
Is that from a kind of instinctive point of view as well, rather than you kind of weighing it up? properly? Like, is it you try and go off gut feeling if it feels right, or are you very much kind of like weighing up the benefits of working with people and not working with them and going and doing stuff?
Yeah, I think it just comes from just hindsight. You know, if you look back at the times when you've said yes and then been resentful at the client and yourself for saying yes, and or maybe just not charging for changes that you've made, or saying yes to like family projects for free, and then you know, you kind of like in the trenches, but you don't really know how to get out of them because there's nothing on the line for your family member, and you're like, I'm doing actually a lot of work for you, and it's kind of hard to navigate that, and you want to maintain a family relationship, and oh my god, and saying no, I think, has been the most liberating and important thing that you can learn as a freelancer, and well, for me so far, I think.
And how long did it take for you to be happy with the person you are now?
Am I happy with the person I am now?
Well, you've got to be at some point. You're a very interesting and confident person.
That's very kind of you to say. I don't feel that, but how long did it take me to be happy with the person I am now? I think I'm still kind of constantly working on a lot of, you know, insecurities and things that I need to deal with, but I think I've always felt super relieved when I've quit full-time jobs. And I think I've learned that I need to pursue whatever I'm doing 100%, even if it eventually falls apart and is the wrong thing to have pursued, maybe, but just to do that from a place, not from a place of fear as much as a place of just passion. And I think Webflail has definitely been the first thing that's had traction from that process, but I see it as like Webflow has only had traction because of all the other creative stuff that I've tried and pursued, just because I genuinely wanted to do it. And I think as long as I can keep doing that, then I feel like that will be the healthiest thing for me to really fully be me and be happy as a result, I think. Although you're asking me all this stuff, Will, and I'm trying to work out a lot of this. I'm saying this as if I've got like solid answers, and like I just don't.
Life changes a lot though, but it's interesting in the kind of current moment which you're in now to understand how you're thinking. I think it's very interesting, regardless. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel the furthest along, the closest I've ever come to fully living the life that I want to live. Interesting. So what does that feel like? It feels like there's more and more alignment between what I say I want to do and what I'm actually doing. And I think that's where we get anxious, is where we're doing stuff that isn't what we feel like we should be focusing on. I think it's less about doing the stuff and feeling anxious. It's more like the anxiety of not doing, or that's when I get anxious. Like I was anxious in jobs because I was like frustrated, and I was like, I'm not meant to be doing this, but I'm spending my life doing this thing. And I think that's when I feel quite, frustrated and anxious and not really myself. Whereas I think now I'm kind of doing what I feel like I should be doing. And writing a lot of articles with Webflail and doing the newsletter and doing the podcast and asking people hard questions and not trying to answer them myself like I have now. And then the other thing that's happening at the moment is that I'm trying to set up this agency called Maku with some friends who I feel really aligned with. And that's really exciting as well, because I definitely want to do more creative work, but work with other talented people who can basically fill the skill sets that I'm weaker on. And I think that's what I said at the start, is that, you know, just because you've done a bit of branding, a bit of design, a bit of development, like it doesn't mean you're great at any of those. And I think what I really want to do is to work with people who know what their particular skill set in that creative space is, and then kind of make sure that I'm doing the thing that I'm better at. To be honest. No, I love that. Okay, final 3 questions.
Okay, great.
How has your mindset changed on the journey?
I think I am less brash, maybe, because I've realised that there are like objective consequences to my actions more, probably with finances more than anything else. Tax returns, oof, you know, they're going to come and bite you, and you got to have that 20% saved. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that just becoming a little bit more, and I'm still working on this, but I definitely have become a little bit more, adult and objective. My therapist has described me as a toddler. Like, you know, when a toddler walks around with their belly out and jam all over them, and like, you know, they've got like just jam in their hair and stuff. I don't know why I'm talking about jam so much, but I think that's me as a toddler. I saw a picture the other day of me and I was like, fucking hell. But they just don't care, right? They'll just follow their nose. And if they want to climb a tree, they'll go and climb a tree or whatever. And I think I have been that guy just the whole time as an adult as well, and I don't think that's particularly healthy. Okay. I think there's a time to be that playful toddler and just explore what you do and stuff. But there is a time when you do maybe need to do things, you know, like a full-time job just to support you and do the boring stuff, do the basics well in order to be that toddler outside of being an adult, maybe.
I like that. I got that vision of you as this toddler having a
I mean, you can see me right now, so that's probably pretty easy.
Yeah. What are the keys to succeeding and following your dreams? And I know you're going to say I haven't got there yet, but to where you are now, what advice would you give someone else?
Ask for help. You don't have all the answers. You're not meant to have all the answers, but there are other people around you who have done what you are trying to do. You have literally nothing to lose by reaching out and just saying, hey, can I ask you how you got to where you are? And, you know, ask specific questions, maybe if you are doing that type of an outreach. Because if it's just like, hey, can I pick your brains for half an hour, that's not really the best thing to do, because people are kind of like, well, I don't really know what you want. But my point is that there are people out there that can help you, and by virtue of actually, you know, if they say yes and they do help you, then they are invested in your success. So I think it's really important to think like, you know, if you help someone else with their, I don't know, let's say they're trying to pass an exam and you help them pass that exam. You want to know if they've passed that exam or not. And if they haven't, then you want to know why. And you want to, you know, you're invested in their success. So I think that's a really interesting thing about accepting that you don't have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to pretend you're bigger than you are. You don't need to be the expert if you've just started out. Like you're not. Own that, and, you know, find out the answers from people that do have the answers, and there's no shame in that. And I think that took me ages to work out, and I was trying to be someone I wasn't for too long.
That's actually really sound, because also you feel a level of like embarrassment going and asking a question you think is really stupid for someone, but someone else is like, yeah, I'd love to help you.
Yeah. And also, you know how flattering it is to get asked by someone, hey, like, I see that you've done this. Can I just ask you how you got to where I, you know, like, it's so flattering if someone's like, hey, I want to ask you about your life and how you did what you've done, and how validating that is. And you'd be surprised how much much help people are willing to give you if you're just willing to be humble enough to ask for it, and self-aware enough to accept that you don't know what you don't have all the answers. You don't need to be the expert. And what I've also found is that experts are often trying to work stuff out the whole time as well. Like this whole concept of, you know, being an expert, especially in, well, I think in design and development, it's really interesting because there's so many tools coming out right now that are, you know, literally every week there's a new app or a new something that's really changing the dynamic of the industry if that were to catch on. And yeah, there's so much to learn, and you have more to give back to them by virtue of asking the questions than you think as well. Because, you know, if someone's like, hey, how did you da-da-da? It's like, oh, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that being something that people wanted to know about. So yeah, just ask for help more. Don't be afraid to reach out. You don't need to have one mentor. You know, there are plenty of people who can, you know, there's a tribe of mentors that you can have, essentially. I think people reach out being like, not that I've been reached out to, but I know other people that have, just to be clear, who people will say, "Can you be my mentor?" In fact, the co-founder of the agency that I'm setting up, he gets every week people in his DMs being like, "Hey, I'm from, I'm from the UK, or I'm from Spain, or I'm from India, or whatever. Can you be my mentor? I'm learning design." And that's not scalable. He can't mentor. He might have an hour call with them and it help them, but it's not scalable. But actually, if you ask a lot of different people who might have different aspects of personality traits you want or career steps you want to take, then there's this kind of really powerful network effect of people looking out for you. So yeah, sorry, that was the longest.
Honestly,
answer,
it's actually lovely as well, and it's really true. Okay, final question.
Okay.
What's the one lesson you would want to teach your future children about life? Or we can change it to, what's the one lesson you'd like to teach little Jack with the jam around his face about life?
Yeah.
Either or, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I think future godchildren. If I had any. I don't know if anyone would give me that honour. You can do it, I think.
As Nike say, just do it.
Yeah, you just, if you want to be a ballerina, or go for it. You can do it. Like, I think as parents sometimes, and I'm not necessarily speaking about my own parents, but I've noticed a lot of the time people, parents might pass on their own fears to their children, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like, of course you want to protect your child. But sometimes I think it comes from a place of, it can be a limiting belief that is being passed on rather than a true fear. And I think, sometimes you just need to go for it and see what happens and learn from it and live your own life out to a certain extent. Like, there are going to be people that say, you can't do that, or I wouldn't do that if I was you. And go and see if that's true for yourself, I think. And if you're going to do it, go for it 110. And and try and laugh along the way, even if it's tougher than you thought it was going to be, which it inevitably will be. But that's not a reason to not do it.
Jack, I love it. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time today.
It's been fun.
It's been a really interesting conversation for me, just learning all the little snippets, as with the podcast, but also just about your mindset as well in life, and all the hurdles, and as you say, all these failures and stuff have been, that people can learn so much from that.
Yeah,
so
hopefully.
I've really, really enjoyed it. Grateful for your time. Outlaw number 20. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Valley of Outlaws podcast. Please follow us across Spotify and YouTube, and see all our latest news across our socials.